The town of Whitehaven was no stranger to New Year's Eve celebrations. Every year, locals would gather in the town square, where the old clock tower loomed, its hands frozen at midnight since a fire gutted the building decades ago. It had become a tradition, a symbol of endings and beginnings. But there was one house in Whitehaven no one talked about. On the edge of town, shrouded by bare, twisting trees, stood the Holloway Manor. It was said to be cursed, a place where time stopped just like the clock tower. No one had lived there for years, and the windows, caked with grime, seemed to watch the world with an unblinking stare. This New Year's Eve, 4 friends dared to break the silence surrounding Holloway Manor. Jamie, Rachel, Mark, and Sarah, fueled by champagne and youthful bravado, decided to ring in the new year with a private adventure. What better way to start 2023 than to debunk an old ghost story? Jamie had said, grinning as he pocketed a flashlight. The air grew colder as they approached the manor, their laughter fading into uneasy silence. The wrought iron gate groaned as Mark pushed it open, the sound piercing the night. Rachel hesitated at the threshold. "Guys, maybe we shouldn't," she whispered, but the others dismissed her nerves. Inside, the house was eerily untouched, as though its former occupants had simply vanished. The air smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. Dust coated the furniture, but no cobwebs adorned the corners, an oddity that none of them noticed at first. The group moved cautiously through the rooms, the floorboards creaking under their feet. Jamie led the way, his flashlight beam dancing over faded wallpaper and cracked picture frames. Then they reached the grand staircase, spiraling into darkness. "Let's go up," Jamie said, his voice betraying a hint of unease. The second floor was colder, and the silence felt oppressive. As they entered a large bedroom, Sarah froze. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. They strained their ears. A faint ticking sound seemed to come from the walls, growing louder with each passing second. "Must be rats," Mark said, but his voice wavered. Suddenly, the bedroom door slammed shut. Rachel screamed, and they rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The ticking grew deafening, echoing in their ears. Then the mirror above the dresser began to fog over. At first, they thought it was condensation, but then words appeared, scrawled as though by an invisible hand. "Time is up!" Panic set in. The flashlight flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. When the light returned, Jamie was gone. They searched frantically, calling his name, but the only response was the relentless ticking. Mark kicked the door until it splintered, and they fled down the stairs, the sound following them. They reached the front door, only to find it locked tight. The clock in the parlor struck midnight, its chime impossibly loud, drowning out their screams. In the sudden silence that followed, they realized they were no longer alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hollow and eyes void of life. They whispered in unison, their voices like the rustling of dead leaves. "Welcome to forever." The townspeople found the house empty the next morning. The 4 friends were never seen again. But as the new year began, strange occurrences plagued Whitehaven. Mirrors fogged up with cryptic messages, and the frozen clock tower chimed at random intervals, its haunting echo carrying a single warning: time is never kind.
Story number 2.
Here's another spine-chilling tale for your audience. The snowstorm hit without warning on New Year's Eve, burying the small mountain town of Frost Hollow in a suffocating blanket of white. The locals, used to harsh winters, hunkered down in their homes, except for Lily and her boyfriend, Eric. They had rented a remote cabin to celebrate the new year, eager for a private getaway. The drive up had been uneventful, but as the storm intensified, Lily felt a creeping sense of unease. The trees lining the winding road seemed to close in on them, their bare branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the car windows. When they arrived at the cabin, it was nearly dark. The structure was old, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. Inside, the air was stale, and the temperature was only slightly warmer than outside. The power was out, and the only light came from the flickering flames of a small wood stove. They tried to settle in, unpacking their bags and lighting candles. But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The shadows cast by the flames seemed to twist unnaturally, and the wind howling outside sounded almost like whispers. "Did you see anyone else on the way up?" Lily asked Eric as they sat down to dinner. "No," he replied, frowning. "Why?" I don't know, she said, her voice barely audible. It just feels wrong here. As the evening wore on, the whispers grew louder. At first, Eric dismissed it as the wind, but even he began to feel uneasy. Around 11:30, Lily went to fetch more firewood. When she opened the door, she froze. In the snow, just beyond the porch, were footprints. They were too large to be human, and they circled the cabin as though the intruder had been watching them. "Eric!" she screamed, slamming the door. He rushed over and stared at the prints, his face pale. "We need to leave," he said, grabbing his coat. But as they stepped outside, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The footprints were no longer outside the cabin, they led inside. Panicked, they ran back inside and locked the door. The cabin was deathly silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Eric searched every room, but there was no one there. Still, the feeling of being watched was unbearable. At midnight, the whispers stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the cabin's lone window shattered, spraying them with shards of glass. Lily screamed as Eric grabbed a fireplace poker. A figure loomed in the doorway. It was impossibly tall, its face hidden by a hood. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its breath came out in ragged gasps that echoed in the small cabin. "Leave us alone," Eric shouted, brandishing the poker. The figure didn't move. Instead, it raised a hand, and the room grew colder. The fire sputtered out, plunging them into darkness. Lily fumbled for her phone to use the flashlight, but when she turned it on, Eric was gone. She screamed his name, but the only response was the sound of heavy breathing behind her. Lily was never seen again. The cabin remained empty, but hikers reported strange occurrences in the area. Voices whispering from the trees, shadowy figures watching from a distance, and the relentless sound of breathing that grew louder the closer they got to the old cabin. Now, locals warn anyone against visiting Frost Hollow on New Year's Eve. They say the storm comes every year, and with it, the shadowy figure who takes those foolish enough to enter its domain.
Story number 3.
In the outskirts of a quiet suburban neighborhood, there was an urban legend about the last call curse. It was said that if you received a phone call exactly at 11:59 p.m. on New Year's Eve from an unknown number, you should never answer. The call, they claimed, was from something that wasn't human. Most dismissed the tale as nonsense, but Olivia, a skeptic and lover of urban legends, decided to put it to the test. She planned her New Year's Eve at home alone, determined to document any strange occurrences. She set her phone to vibrate, opened her laptop to record the event, and waited. As the hours ticked by, she laughed at how absurd the idea seemed. Outside, fireworks cracked in the distance, and neighbors cheered in anticipation of the new year. At 11:59 p.m., her phone buzzed. She froze. The screen displayed "Unknown caller" in bold letters. Her heart raced as her curiosity battled with fear. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, hitting the green button to answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. At first, there was silence. Then a faint, raspy whisper came through the line. "I see you." Her stomach dropped. "Who is this?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The whisper grew louder, distorted, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. "Time's up." The call ended abruptly, and the room fell silent. Olivia laughed nervously, convincing herself it was a prank. But as she set the phone down, the screen lit up again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a live video. The video showed her own living room. Her blood ran cold as she stared at the screen. The camera was behind her, showing her sitting on the couch. She whipped around, but no one was there. "Okay, this isn't funny," she yelled, her voice echoing in the empty house. The video feed flickered, and the angle changed. Now it was closer, zooming in on her face. Her breath quickened as she backed away from the couch. "Whoever's doing this, stop!" The screen went black. For a moment, the only sound was her own panicked breathing. Then, a knock came from the front door. She screamed and grabbed a kitchen knife, inching toward the door. "Go away!" she shouted. The knocking stopped. Her phone buzzed again. Another video feed appeared, this time showing the front porch. The porch was empty, but the camera began to pan slowly, focusing on the living room window. Behind the glass, a pale face stared back at her. The lights in the house flickered, and a deep guttural voice echoed from all around. "You shouldn't have answered." Olivia's screams were drowned out by the sound of static, and when the neighbors checked on her the next morning, the house was empty. Her phone was found on the couch, the screen frozen on a single frame, her own terrified face staring into the camera. Now, in that quiet suburban neighborhood, no one dares answer unknown calls on New Year's Eve. Those who have broken the rules say they hear whispers at midnight, and some have disappeared without a trace.